History is full of heroes, or so we're told. Brave explorers, great leaders, men who discovered new lands and built nations from nothing. But that's not the full story. Because behind the legends, there's another version of events, one filled with greed, cruelty, disease, and death. The history of the USA isn't just about freedom and opportunity. It's also about invasion, about people being driven from their land, about lives being destroyed long before the country even existed, reminding the audience of the human cost and fostering empathy for native communities. This isn't the polished version you hear in classrooms. This is the darker side. The version where the heroes don't always look like heroes. And the truth is far more uncomfortable because understanding these realities raises awareness of injustices that shaped the nation. Cruel Columbus. Christopher Columbus is often remembered as the man who discovered America, but confronting this narrative reveals the darker truths behind his arrival. But when he arrived in 1492, the land wasn't empty. It was already home to millions of people. Columbus didn't discover a new world. He entered one that already existed. At first, the native people welcomed him. They offered food, gifts, and help. But it didn't take long for things to change. Columbus and his men were searching for gold. When they didn't find enough, they began to take it by force. The native people were made to work. Those who refused were punished. Some had their hands cut off. Others were killed. Entire communities were destroyed. The disease spread quickly. Violence became normal. Within a few decades, huge numbers of native people had died. What started as an arrival became the beginning of something far darker. Savage settlers. The early settlers in America didn't arrive in a peaceful land waiting to be explored. They arrived in a place already lived in, already understood, and already owned by native people. But that didn't stop them. Land was taken. People were pushed aside. And violence became part of everyday life. Sometimes the brutality was open and obvious. Other times it was hidden behind deals, promises, and lies. Settlers didn't just fight with weapons. They brought disease with them, illnesses the native people had never encountered before. These diseases spread quickly and killed thousands. But even that wasn't always enough. In 1758, British General Geoffrey Amherst gave blankets as a peace offering to Native Americans. The blankets came from a smallpox hospital. The result was exactly what you'd expect. Illness spread. People died. The disease spread quickly and killed thousands, turning what seemed like a gift into a weapon, encouraging the audience to feel moral concern. Rotten revolutionaries. By the late 1700s, tensions were building between the American colonies and Britain. Taxes were rising, control was tightening, and the colonies were starting to push back. This would become the American Revolution, a fight for freedom, or at least that's how it's remembered. But not everyone was fighting for liberty. Some of the loudest voices demanding freedom were enslavers, men who spoke about rights and independence, while denying both to others. The Declaration of Independence claimed that all men are created equal, but that clearly wasn't the reality. Slavery continued. Inequality remained, and for many nothing changed at all. Even during the war, the fighting wasn't always noble. Prisoners were treated badly. Supplies were short. Conditions were brutal. Victory didn't come easily. But when it did, a new nation was born. One built on powerful ideas, but also deep contradictions. Slavery and suffering. Slavery had existed in different parts of the world long before America was formed. But in the American colonies, it became something much larger. Something systematic. Something built into the very foundations of society. It began with the forced removal of millions of Africans from their homes. Men, women, and children were captured, often taken during raids or sold by rival groups. They were chained together and forced to march long distances to the coast. Many died along the way. Those who survived were forced onto ships bound for America. This journey became known as the Middle Passage. Conditions on these ships were horrific. People were packed tightly together, often lying shoulder to shoulder with barely any space to move. Air was limited. The disease spread quickly. Food and water were scarce. The sick was often left untreated. Many died before reaching land. Bodies were thrown overboard into the ocean. For those who survived the journey, the suffering did not end. They were sold at auctions. Families were separated without warning. children taken from parents, husbands from wives. Once sold, enslaved people were forced to work. Long hours in fields, plantations produced crops like cotton and tobacco. There was no pay, no choice, no freedom. Punishments were severe. Beatings were common. Public punishments were used to create fear. Attempts to escape were met with brutal consequences. Some were captured and punished. Others were killed. Despite this, many resisted in whatever ways they could. Some tried to escape. Some slowed their work. Some held onto their culture and identity. But the system remained in place. Year after year, generation after generation, slavery became normalized, accepted by many, defended by those who benefited from it. It wasn't just an economic system. It was a system built on control, fear, and dehumanization, designed to make the audience consider the cruelty behind the system of slavery. And for millions of people, there was no way out. A nation divided. As the United States expanded, the divide between North and South became impossible to ignore. The country was growing. New states were being formed. New land was being claimed. But with that growth came a question that refused to go away. Would these new states allow slavery or not? In the North, things were beginning to change. Industry was growing, factories were replacing farms, and slavery was becoming less central to the economy. Many in the North began to oppose it. Some argued it was morally wrong. Others believed it held the country back. But in the South, slavery remained essential. Large plantations depended on enslaved labor. Cotton, tobacco, and other crops generated huge wealth, and that wealth relied entirely on the system continuing. To many in the South, ending slavery wasn't just a moral issue. It was a threat to their entire way of life. Tensions grew, arguments became more heated, compromises were attempted, and failed. The country was splitting, not just politically, but socially. Families, communities, and states began to take sides. Then, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. He opposed the expansion of slavery. For many in the South, that was the breaking point. One by one, Southern states began to leave the Union. They formed their own government, and in 1861, war began, the American Civil War. It was unlike anything the country had experienced before. Large-scale battles, new weapons, mass casualties. Soldiers fought in brutal conditions. Disease spread through camps. Medical care was limited. More men would die from illness than from battle. But the fighting itself was devastating. Brother fought against brother, neighbor against neighbor. The country was tearing itself apart. Cities were destroyed. Land was devastated. Hundreds of thousands lost their lives. And at the center of it all was slavery. The war would eventually end in 1865. The Union was preserved. Slavery was abolished, but the damage had already been done. The scars of the conflict would remain long after the fighting stopped. Lawless lands after the Civil War, the United States pushed further west. New land meant new opportunity, or at least, that's how it was sold. But the reality was far less controlled. The West was unpredictable, harsh, and often lawless. Towns appeared quickly. Some were built around gold, others around railroads. People arrived in huge numbers. But where there were people, there was conflict. Law enforcement was limited. In many places, there were no proper police forces. Justice was often handled by whoever had the most power, or the fastest gun. Disputes could turn violent quickly. Arguments over land, money, or reputation often ended in gunfights, and not everyone waited for the law. Vigilante groups formed. They took justice into their own hands. Sometimes they targeted criminals. Other times, innocent people. Trials were rare. Punishments were immediate and often deadly. Life in these towns was unstable. Danger was constant, and survival depended on who you trusted and who you didn't. Outlaws and violence. The lawless nature of the West created the perfect environment for outlaws, men who lived outside the law, men who made their names through violence. Some became famous. Names like Billy the Kid and Jesse James spread across the country. To some, they were criminals. To others, they were legends. But the reality was far less glamorous. Banks were robbed, trains were attacked, people were killed. Outlaws didn't just steal money, they brought fear. Towns lived under constant threat. Anyone could become a target. Law enforcement officers tried to stop them. Figures like Wyatt Earp became symbols of order in a place where there often was none. But even law enforcement officers weren't always clean. Corruption existed on both sides. And the line between lawman and outlaw wasn't always clear. Gunfights became part of daily life. Short, sudden, deadly. There were no second chances. Reputation meant everything, and once violence started, it rarely stopped. The end of the frontier. By the late 1800s, the American frontier was beginning to change. The land that had once been wild and unpredictable was slowly being brought under control. Railroads stretched across the country. Towns became cities. Law enforcement became more organized. The days of the open frontier were coming to an end. But for Native American tribes, this period brought something far worse. For decades, they had been pushed from their land. Treaties were made, and then broken. Promises were given, and then ignored. As settlers moved west, Native Americans were forced further away. Eventually, many were placed on reservations. Land that was often poor, far from their original homes. Their way of life was restricted. Their freedom was taken. Conflicts continued. Some resisted. Some fought back. But the outcome was already decided. The power of the United States government was overwhelming. Events like the Wounded Knee Massacre showed just how brutal this period could be. Hundreds of Native Americans were killed, men, women, and children. By the end of the century, the frontier was no longer what it had been. The expansion was complete, but it had come at a cost paid by those who had been there long before it began. A changing nation. As the 20th century began, the United States was no longer a young, unstable nation. It was growing into something far more powerful. Cities expanded rapidly. Factories increased production. New technologies changed how people lived and worked. Electricity became more common. Transport improved. Communication became faster. But progress didn't benefit everyone equally. Industrial work was hard. Long hours, low pay, dangerous conditions. Workers had little protection. Injuries were common. And if you couldn't work, you didn't get paid. Children were often part of the workforce. Young boys and girls worked in factories, mines, and mills. They worked long hours for very little money, and their education suffered as a result. At the same time, millions of immigrants arrived in America. They came searching for opportunity, a better life, more freedom. But what they often found was different. Overcrowded housing, poor living conditions, discrimination. Many were forced into the lowest-paying jobs and treated as outsiders. Tensions grew in cities, between the rich and the poor, between workers and employers, between different communities. Strikes and protests became more common. Workers demanded better pay, safer conditions, shorter hours. Sometimes these protests turned violent. Police were called in. Force was used. The gap between those with power and those without it became clearer. America was changing, becoming richer, more advanced, but also more divided. Because while some benefited from progress, others were left struggling just to survive. War and power. As the world entered the 20th century, global conflict became unavoidable. In 1914, World War I began. At first, the United States stayed out of it, but that didn't last. In 1917, the US entered the war. American soldiers were sent overseas to fight in Europe. The war was brutal. Trench warfare, new weapons, mass casualties. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives. When the war ended in 1918, the world had changed, but peace didn't last. Just over 20 years later, another, even larger conflict began, World War II. This time, the United States became heavily involved. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the country entered the war. The scale of the conflict was immense. Fighting took place across multiple continents. Millions of lives were lost. The war pushed technology further than ever before, but it also led to one of the most destructive moments in history. In 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was immediate. Entire cities were devastated. Thousands were killed instantly. Many more died later from injuries and radiation. The war ended shortly after, and the United States emerged as one of the world's most powerful nations. But that power came with responsibility and with consequences, because the decisions made during war, it would shape the future for decades to come. Rights and resistance. After the wars, the United States stood as a global power, but inside the country many people were still fighting for basic rights. For African Americans, equality was far from reality. Segregation was still enforced in many places. Separate schools, separate transport, separate facilities, and these were rarely equal. Discrimination affected daily life. Opportunities were limited, voices were ignored, but people began to push back. The civil rights movement grew stronger. Protests were organized. Marches took place across the country. People demanded change. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. became central to the movement. He spoke about equality, about justice, about non-violent resistance. Others took different approaches. Some believed change needed to come faster. That stronger action was necessary. Tensions rose. Protests were met with resistance. Police used force. Arrests were common. Violence broke out in some areas, but the movement continued. Pressure built, and eventually, change began to happen. Laws were passed. Segregation was challenged. Rights were expanded. But even with these changes, the struggle didn't simply end, because inequality doesn't disappear overnight, and the effects of the past don't fade easily. Modern America. As the late 20th century gave way to the 21st, the United States continued to evolve. Technology has advanced rapidly. Computers became common. The internet connected people across the world. Communication became instant. Industries changed. New jobs were created. Old ones disappeared. The way people lived, worked, and interacted shifted quickly, but alongside progress, new challenges emerged. In 2001, the country experienced one of the most shocking events in its history: the September 11th attacks. Planes were hijacked, buildings were destroyed, thousands of people were killed. The impact was immediate, security increased, foreign policy changed. War followed. Conflicts in places like Afghanistan and Iraq became part of the response. These wars lasted for years. Lives were lost, resources were spent. Debate continued over their purpose and impact. At home, divisions remained. Political differences became sharper. Discussions around identity, equality, and opportunity continued. Economic challenges affected many. Some prospered, others struggled. The gap between wealth and poverty remained significant. America remained powerful, influential on a global scale, but still facing internal questions, because despite everything that had changed, not everything had been resolved. The history of the United States is often told as a story of progress, discovery, freedom, success. But that version leaves things out, because alongside the achievements, there is another side, one built on conflict, on inequality, on decisions that came at a cost. From the arrival of Europeans to the expansion across the land, from slavery to civil war, from global power to internal division, each chapter carries its own consequences. Some were immediate, others are still being felt today. History doesn't disappear. It shapes what comes next, and understanding that history means looking at all of it. Not just the parts that are easy to accept, because the truth isn't always comfortable, but it matters.